Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Please allow me to briefly take you to the moment that I experimentally discovered how and why massively parallel processing makes new computers faster and makes new supercomputers fastest. As a research supercomputer scientist who came of age in the 1970s and 80s, my goal was to become a supercomputer magician or a computer wizard and to make my 64 binary thousand commodity off-the-shelf processors to seemingly disappear or to become almost invincible. When I said this, a third grader shook his head in disagreement and said to me, "I want real magic." "What is real magic?" I asked. "I want you to make me to disappear." Supercomputing wizardry is to make mathematical magic by making one binary million email wires to seemingly disappear or to become almost invincible. At 10:15 a.m. New York time, Tuesday the 4th of July of 1989, the US Independence Day, I made my 65,536 commodity processors to seemingly disappear. That is, I experimentally discovered that my ensemble of 64 binary thousand processors that were identical to each other could emulate one seamless, cohesive supercomputer that was the precursor to the modern supercomputer. It was a triumph that made the news headlines. It was a supercomputing breakthrough because the two leading supercomputer pioneers in the world, namely Seymour Cray and Gene Amdahl, had claimed that it will forever remain impossible for the slowest 65,536 processors and to solve a grand challenge problem and solve it faster than the fastest supercomputer in the world. After my experimental discovery of the 4th of July of 1989, the likes of Steve Jobs, Seymour Cray, and Gene Amdahl were knocking on my door to learn how I experimentally discovered the massively parallel processing supercomputer. After my experimental discovery of the 4th of July of 1989, it can no longer be said that parallel processing is a beautiful theory that lacked experimental confirmation. That was my eureka moment. That moment, 10:15 a.m. New York time, Tuesday the 4th of July of 1989, was the moment that I dramatized the existence of my ensemble of 64 binary thousand commodity off-the-shelf processors. That was the moment that I experimentally discovered how and why parallel processing makes new computers faster and makes new supercomputers fastest. That was the moment that I experimentally discovered how and why my 16 network deep commodity email wires, comprised of a network of commodity off-the-shelf processors, is both a new internet and a new parallel processing supercomputer. That was the moment that I experimentally discovered how to simultaneously compute on an ensemble of 64 binary thousand processors, as well as how to synchronously communicate across a global network of short email wires that outlined and defined a new internet. That was the moment that I experimentally discovered how to seamlessly compute across an ensemble of 64 binary thousand processors and seamlessly compute as one cohesive new supercomputer. That was the moment I experimentally discovered how to make 64 binary thousand processors to seemingly disappear, and discovered how to make 1 binary million email wires to seem invincible. To make those 65,536 processors to de facto disappear makes the word internet redundant. That new internet, that is a global network of 2 raised to power 16 identical and commodity off-the-shelf processors, was in effect reduced to a new supercomputer that was beyond the conventional vector processing supercomputers of the 1970s and 80s. I was the lone wolf programmer that made that experimental discovery, and made it by programming that 16 network deep new internet and programming it to seemingly disappear and to emulate a seamless, cohesive, and new computer that is the fastest supercomputer ever. I visualized my global network of those 64 binary thousand processors as a polycentric network that had no centers, no circumference, and no boundaries. I visualized it as a network that was powered by only 2 to power 16 commodity off-the-shelf processors that were identical to each other and that were equal distances afar and apart from each other. What made the news headlines in 1989 was that I, Philip Emeagwali, had won the top prize in supercomputing and won the prize for experimentally discovering how and why massively parallel processing could and should be harnessed to make new computers faster and make new supercomputers fastest. I experimentally discovered how to compute faster than any supercomputer that computed with the most powerful vector processing unit ever built. I coined that term, polycentric network, because my illustration of my 16 network deep internet showed it tightly enshrouding my 2 to power 16 or 65,536 commodity off-the-shelf processors and enshrouding those processors with my 16 times 2 to power 16 or 1,048,576 short bidirectional commodity email wires that I called communication channels. I created a one-to-one correspondence between each email wire and each bidirectional edge of a cube in a 16-dimensional universe. Back in the early 1980s, I illustrated my 16-dimensional global network of processors and illustrated my network with 16 colors and as a 16-colored network of networks that had 16 mutually orthogonal directions emanating from each of the 16 nearest neighboring processors.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.